Welcome to the 2022 Hurricane Season Outlook. I'm your host, Steve Williams, joined by...
And I'm Justin Callahan. Hello.
Thanks for stopping by and visiting us today as we talk about the new hurricane season and getting ready. So let's start off today talking about the forecast for 2022, Justin.
All right.
Have you seen the news?
I've seen the news. It's very timely that we're having this live stream today because Hurricane Agatha, which was actually off the coast of Mexico,
First Pacific storm,
yes, across the Yucatan Peninsula, is just kind of waddling out into the Caribbean right now. And they are saying it's going to come towards Florida.
Yes, very exciting because we're having our broadcast just as the first storm of the season is putting Florida in its sights.
Seems appropriate. And if it makes a name status, it's going to be Hurricane Alex.
That's correct. And to have a storm start off in the Pacific, get named, come into the Gulf, get named on the Atlantic list, the first two letters done, season just started.
The above average season starts off very well.
I think this sets the tone for today's conversation and why you should be getting ready for hurricane season.
Absolutely.
But before we jump into getting prepared, I want to finish talking a little bit more about the season. Now I know NOAA did their recent broadcast and they had a little rough start on that stream, didn't they?
Technical difficulties about it. It's okay. It's okay. Yeah.
But they did finally get their forecast out. What are they calling for? How many named storms?
So right now for 2022, they are accounting for from 14 to 21 named storms.
Okay.
So using a goodly portion of the alphabet, but probably not going into Greek letters this year. We have 6 to 10 that are going to get up to hurricane status.
Okay.
So at least a category 1. And then they're predicting 3 to 6 major hurricanes, which is a Cat 3 or more. And that's actually in line with what last year was predicted as well, and what actually ended up happening. So.
And certainly it's the major storms that we really have to focus on when we talk about our preparedness.
Right.
The other storms could be just some extra rain, and not that wind and rain doesn't damage even closing roads or losing power, but it's those major hurricanes that are your regional and larger disaster impacts that we want to really be ready for. So this is
Florida.
Yes, that's especially for us here in Florida. So this isn't another above year forecast then?
Yep, they're saying this is I could be wrong, but it's about, I think this is the 4th year that they're predicting an above average season. So yeah, we're in the busy time. I mean, it was above average last year, but it didn't seem like that for Florida.
Right.
Because we actually didn't have a single one make landfall.
Yeah, so it was 7 hurricanes last year, I recall, and I think we had 4 major storms.
Yep. I mean, yeah, the Northeast and the middle, the middle of the East Coast had a heck of a time. There was flooding all over the place, and some
I think we
places
have a
that never
spaghetti
saw
model that
flooding.
kind of shows last year. Let's put that on for our viewers, and you can see that a lot of the activity really just stayed in the ocean last year.
Yeah. And also, I take that back. Florida actually got hit a little bit, but it was all up in the Panhandle. So
yes.
Now we're in the peninsula.
Yes, a lot of storms, a lot of the major storms really stayed into the Atlantic, kind of fizzled out in the Atlantic, and that was a good situation. Again, as we talk about Florida, but you can see the spaghetti model really just kind of shows that at origination, Florida is, if it's a straight shot storm, it's coming right to Florida.
Right. Well, and Alex is going to be a perfect example of that. I mean, it's making a beeline across the Caribbean. And this was one of the really interesting things that Noah was talking about during the presentation, is that right now there's actually a warm weather current that goes up through the Caribbean.
Mm-hmm.
And normally it doesn't come all the way up in the Gulf this early in the season, but that has actually come up sooner than later. And so they said in their forecast that they were predicting significant activity earlier in the season because of it.
Wow.
Whereas normally we don't kick off really full steam until like July, August. And it's kind of almost true to form that we have our first hurricane rolling in right after.
Well, and from our spaghetti models are really coming off the coast of Africa, but Alex is potentially coming from the western Gulf, so other side.
Absolutely.
So I thought it was also interesting to kind of look at we've had a heightened tornado season, it seems. And if, I don't know that there's directly, we have the La Nina forces that are playing into that tornado season. I don't know if they're going to play a factor into the hurricane season, but certainly if the number of tornadoes from this year have been any clue, it's been a busy tornado season.
It has, hasn't it? And especially in the Midwest, they've had some serious, some significant hurricane or tornadoes where they haven't really had those in a few years.
I mean, according to Wikipedia, for 2022 alone, it was 566 reported tornadoes. And that's, we're halfway through the year, and obviously they're coming out of tornado season, but that's a lot of storm activity.
That was keeping Weather Chasing Twitter very busy.
Yes. And I think that's the kind of stuff that we want to be cognizant of when we think about hurricane season, and we have to prepare a little bit differently here for that. But I think the tornado season, these big storms are real, and they need to be thought about seriously. Well, how about the list of names? Have you seen the list of names for this year?
The list of names have a few that are my favorites. I'm not gonna lie, there are a number of good names on there, especially Hurricane Hermine. We have a Gaston, which is my personal favorite. There's a Hurricane Sherry, Tobias. So we've got a good set of names. Fiona.
Yes,
so,
it's the age of. This is definitely the year, kind of the entertaining names.
Yeah, I feel like, I don't know, I feel like they picked them from Disney Plus or something. So it's entirely possible.
Definitely, what's your name of the year going to be?
My name of the year is absolutely going to be Gaston.
Really?
If Gaston is not a powerful, just a go crazy hurricane.
I'm going to go ahead and make a note on my paper here. We're calling for that to be a major hurricane, then. Major Hurricane Gaston. Okay.
There's going to be Disney songs all over the place. It's
okay, the memes will take over. All right, great. Well, again, we're not even first day, first week, and it looks like A is going to be taken. So
yeah,
we could be hitting G by the end of June for sure.
It might be that quick.
Okay. All right, we'll have to see. So let's take our last look at we can put the screen up of the forecast. And so just to kind of recap, what we're really thinking about is that we've got 6 to 10 hurricanes with 3 to 6 major storms, and so that's really what we're talking about today. When these storms are coming, you're going to have, just like right now, about a week of forewarning, but that cone of probability narrows each day as it gets closer. So in reality, before a direct impact, it's typically maybe 48 hours of certainty where that storm is going to hit, but there's a lot of variability that occurs up to that point. And you just have to be ready.
Well, and just to keep in mind, a lot of people take the estimations and it's just like, oh, pshaw, we never have that many, major hurricanes or something.
Right.
But a good frame of reference for this is that actually 2005, I was reading this up, 2005 was an above average season.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a season that we had 4 hurricanes crisscross across Florida in rapid succession with noticeable damage and impact to businesses and people alike. Whereas last year we also had an above average season and we had not one hit the peninsula.
Right.
So it matters entirely to a whole lot of different factors whether or not an above average season means an above average season for you. And so that's why we're here. That's why we're saying prepare, be ready, because if you have that 48 hours and Tampa Bay is going to have some fun, time to be prepared is a little bit far and away. You have to be ready to go in those 48 hours.
And I appreciate that we take a little bit of a light view in talking about the season and the names and the things that can happen, but it is a serious topic, and so let's jump into some of the basics in terms of the planning that you need to do. What do you think are the basics that people should really kind of start with to say, how do I even tackle this? It can be a little bit intimidating to say, how do I plan for a disaster?
It can be daunting because you just have a mental image of all the kids, all the dogs in the minivan with food supplies, barking and screaming, sitting outside of a hotel or a shelter. How do you get from here to there, right? So the first and foremost is have a guide. And the best part about that is a lot of news publications, NOAA themselves, the government, I think it's the FEMA website has a guide. And you can go to any one of those and they can say, basically, here's your preparation kit, here's everything that you should have gathered.
Right.
And kind of the good rule of thumb is when you look at the guide, have that idea. That's a habit in our household. We actually put all of those items in one place. We have one cabinet drawer that we put all of that stuff in there, and then if time comes for a hurricane or if we needed to evacuate, we would literally just pick everything up in that drawer, put it in a bucket, and take it out to the car.
You're good to go. Well, I think it facilitates the conversation, and that's where it needs to start. Your stakeholders, your key management personnel, If you sit down and say, how do we plan for a disaster, it's kind of a large, open-ended question. But if you have the guide, it's going to help frame that conversation. And you can start off with simple, high-level assessments of your staff, for instance. Who's in an evacuation zone, right? I mean, just, if people live in an evacuation zone and a major storm is coming, they're going to be ordered to evacuate. These might be key personnel on your staff, maybe key accounting people, key operations people. You need to know, are they in a zone that's going to be required to evacuate? Right. Think about where your office is at too, right?
Absolutely, location is a huge point. And I want to just underscore that, that key staff, right? You might have someone who lives beachside and they get evacuated and maybe they have a plan, but their plan is to go visit family in Georgia, right? You have to account for that if your accountant is going to be in Georgia if there's an evacuation that takes place.
Yep.
Those kinds of things, so that personal preparedness then really rolls into that business preparedness.
Yeah, and those simple questions then lead really to your communication plan, which if we're going to talk about what are the basics, a communication plan is necessary. You have to establish who's responsible for facilitating communication during a disaster and what medium you'll use. Are you going to use a social media chat app like maybe a Teams or a WhatsApp, or are you going to use texting through cellular? What's your backup plan if cellular networks are impacted? Having those communication plans will be important as well.
Absolutely, and having who's going to be the ringleader, who's going to initiate the communication, because it might not be practical to say that everyone's going to have access to a cell phone list of all staff, right? So definitely delegation plays a strong part in that. If you have, you connect to the managers connect to their team, that sort of way. Teams is honestly a great option, simply by having, if you have that in your policies, Teams on mobile devices, either personal or business, because those are going to be coming with them. So that allows you to quickly distribute information to a large group of people without having to have a phone tree, if you will, with everyone calling everybody else and seeing what's going on.
And if they don't get to it at that moment, someone can log in and see that message later because it'll stay in that channel.
Absolutely.
And they'll get that update.
Worst case scenario, if they're out of cell signal or something, then the moment they get in, they can catch up on the conversation and get back into the game.
And it's really easy to build a channel dedicated for emergency communications.
Yep, and absolutely, and that's something we can help with, and we've done that before. We'll actually build a dedicated channel solely for, all right, Hurricane Irma is coming, what is our prepping, what is our post, what is our follow-ups, what is our priorities, all of that in one channel.
Well, I'm mentioning cloud-based tools. It's also a great way to store the important information you're going to need during a disaster as well. Using things like OneDrive, you can store insurance policies, critical, core, data information, asset reports, things that we recommend that you have ready to go in the event of a disaster, especially in that response time.
Absolutely, just like we say, you basically have your go bag if you need to evacuate your home. You need to have that go bag for the business at the same time. Either it's something that we're closing the office, we're evacuating, we're going to grab these few essential items, but it just makes life that much easier, and especially these past few years, the ability to already have all that information in the cloud already. That means as long as you have internet connection wherever you may be, wherever your staff may be, you can have access to those resources.
Absolutely. I think moving, so if we say the basics really start with, where are your people at? What is your communication plan? And where are your critical, asset reports, inventory, insurance information being kept? Those would be the minimum basics to start with. That would be the kickoff of the conversation. And I'm sure when you sit down with your, again, key management or stakeholders and you start that conversation there, it's going to go in a lot of different directions. You're going to hear a lot of different ideas and go from there. And that's a starting point. Again, use a guide. It's going to help drive that conversation. Get a rough plan put together in writing. The guide will help you with that as well, and that really takes you to the next level. And let's do that right here. Talk about the technology aspect of it. I mean, how do we take this conversation for our clients when we're talking about disaster recovery and technology? What's our approach?
Well, first and foremost, once we obviously have the critical staff and the location kind of sussed out, then it comes down to the technology that they're using. And at the end of the day, when we start this conversation, we always want to converse about primarily what applications, what resources you need access to in the most time sensitive. Because at the end of the day, and Steve always likes to say this, is that the application drives the disaster recovery.
Absolutely.
And so that is going to be the critical sense. So if you say, well, I can go for a week without getting access to my OneNote or any other, or my Teams or anything else like that, I can go for a little bit of time without that. But I gotta get into QuickBooks. I gotta get into
Right.
Sage. I gotta be able to pay my vendors and my people on time, no matter what. Well, then that is the thing that is most critical to you in your time.
Yeah. Agreed. And it makes a better business conversation, I think. A lot of times customers will come to us and they'll start talking about, how do I get my server out of the building, or how do I get access to a cloud resource when I'm not in my office? How do I get my VPN to work? But that's not how we like to really drive the conversation. It is about the application. Think about what applications are running your business, where is that application at, and how do I work with that application? Because that's an easier business conversation to have, and then we can get involved to say, okay, this is what it takes to make disaster recovery work for that application. And one application might have a different response time than another.
Absolutely.
Using an example like you said for payroll, for instance, payroll might be something you need within 48 hours, but you might not need maybe your CRM for 5 or 6 days. You could be okay for a week without that. So you would have a level of effort that would be different between those two systems, and that's important to discuss because it could have tangible design implications.
Absolutely, and circling back, remembering that this meshes also with your staff, because if your CEO can get into your finance operations, well, but if they don't know what they're doing, then that's not going to be much benefit, right? And so having those thresholds of, okay, well, we need to get our CFO to be able to access the finance program at any given moment within 48 hours of a disaster, okay, that's a completely different conversation, especially if maybe that person's the one on the beach in Georgia, right? And so there might be different parts of that conversation, and that's why placing that priority on people and what applications you need is always first and foremost. The rest of it, how to protect your office, how to handle your server, some of that's almost secondary in the conversation, because when you're evacuated, that's almost the after effect. What's done is done. The event has happened. How do you recover from that?
And you have to do that. So once you've made your application list and you've kind of assessed the priority of each application, the next step is to really categorize that into the different scenarios. And again, using Irma as an example, it wasn't a case of massive disaster, but we had massive inaccessibility. We had power outages in pockets, we had roads that were closed. So we had cases where the scenario wasn't so much that there was lost equipment. You just couldn't get to your office, or your office didn't have power. So what do you do?
Right, exactly. And that's kind of rolling into our next conversation is, how do we protect, or how do we resolve the hardware that we have? So first and foremost, obviously, laptops are incredibly accessible. So it might be a situation where key staff takes their laptops with them. Not necessarily to be able to remote in or to connect back to office resources,
Right.
But there might be a possibility your office might be up, has power, has internet, everything's running fine, but your staff can't cross the bridge to get to it. And so if people have their laptops, they'll be able to remote into the office just like they were working from home, and you could resume business operations without any issues.
That's definitely a good point, and who is another part of that, right? So you might have to duplicate some data if you have to have redundancy across your staff as well.
Absolutely. Additionally now, power outages. So power outages is just wanting to touch on that a moment. So we're talking about kind of mobile environments and assuming that the power is going to be out, but there's also ways that we can protect against what might happen after the fact, where maybe the power comes on, but we might have brownouts. If there's any repair that needs to be happening, you might have fluctuations. So making sure that your equipment is battery protected. What we always recommend is our goal for any equipment that we protect with a battery is 30 minutes runtime. That's really enough so that if we needed to shut down something, we could do that. And so you want to make sure, and even go to the point of having some tests done on key equipment. Make sure that if you all lost power, you could run for about 30 minutes. Give yourself enough time to shut things down or anything, assuming, let's say, there might be some brownouts or some up and down statuses after the hurricane.
Well, and if you're worried about a prolonged outage, obviously a generator is going to be your only solution. Battery backups are temporary, just to support for short-term outages. If you're in an area that is potentially vulnerable to an extended power loss, then you might look at a generator. And if that doesn't work out, then again, it's that idea of how can I have all my data accessible or my systems accessible at a different location, failing over to the cloud or failing over to an alternate location.
Mm-hmm. And then also, again, going back, again, to all this ties in together, right? Because going back to the applications, how fast you need to have something up means how do we protect it? Okay, because there's a lot of different ways to back up your data or to synchronize your data with the cloud. And there's always a cost. If you need it up within 24 hours, you can do that, but there's going to be a cost associated with it.
Right.
And finding that balance of how fast do we need resources up and accessible versus our cost for that DR environment is always a balancing act too.
Well, and I think when you look at that cost factor, there's a return on investment there. Disaster recovery, the cost of that is like an insurance policy. You're essentially saying I'm paying this cost to be prepared in the event I need it, and that is directly measured against the cost of your downtime. And that's a calculated, easy thing to figure out. What does it cost if your business is down for an hour? What does it cost if your business is down for a day, a week? What is the impact? And it's not often just measured in a potential loss of income or revenue or relationships in that period of time, but it's the long term. One of the SBA statistics in terms of that is the difficulty for small businesses to recover after disaster because of the loss of momentum, the loss of inertia in their actual operations.
Absolutely. And that's the important thing, is that all of this, it's an old adage, but that ounce of preventative is worth a pound of the cure, right?
Yes.
When a hurricane is coming, when you're within that 48-hour window, all of these thoughts, all of these, I need to test my battery backups, I need to do a recovery instance from my DR environment or from my backups, I need to try to access from a remote location. All of those things, if you're doing that within the last 48 hours, it's too late, right? People are already trying, and especially remember that your staff is already, they have their personal families and whatever, they might be having to deal with that sort of things. So you want to have these DR plans, you want to have that preparation, that testing done ahead of time. Because that way, when you make that decision, okay, we're going to close the office, we're going to begin evacuations, boom, 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 here's the plan, here's how it's going to implement. We've got our cloud resources that are getting spun up in case because we're being evacuated, etc. All of that has to happen with that momentum already prepared and behind.
I would definitely say our customers I feel most confident who could handle a disaster have, typically some sort of brief operational procedure on how to handle a disaster and who's responsible. They have their go bag ready, which is typically going to be a short term. Again, one of the benefits of hurricanes, we have that kind of 48-hour window, so they know that, okay, we're going to run this special backup in advance of a disaster, and that backup's going to go with this key person. And most importantly, they test this. They test this communication plan, they take that backup, they go off-site, can I get into my accounting system remotely? Can I access that application remotely? Did that system work correctly? And that testing is so important, because as much as you want to sit there and think you've thought of every scenario, until you start practicing, it's going to be the little things that get you, oh, I forgot, I didn't take that password with me that I need to log into that thing, or, oh, I didn't anticipate what would happen if I couldn't get on a VPN connection, or where I might get that Wi-Fi connection at if I'm remote. These are the little things that you might not think about in a planning session, but when you go out and practice and test it, they suddenly come to light, and you're now creating new steps and covering those scenarios. So it's very important to practice and test your plan.
Absolutely. And then the last part of that is documentation, documentation, documentation. You can test until the cows come home. You can put your people in place. You can put your backups to the cloud. You can do all of the things.
Mm-hmm.
But let's say Steve's out of pocket. Steve's out of contact in Orlando. Well, okay, we can't be sitting here twiddling our thumbs. We have to have a resource that, okay, plan B is here's the documentation, here's the plan of action. Here's the person in secondary in charge that's going to take that and run with it and keep the momentum going in case something happens.
And that's an important note too, is that when we work with our clients, our goal is to help make sure whatever their plan is doesn't depend on us. To the extent possible, we want to enable them to be self-sufficient during a disaster, because we don't know what our availability might be, and that's important to consider. And it's also important, to look at a multi-vendor landscape. There might be application vendors that are worth talking to. There might be other suppliers or distributors who are important to your business to talk to. Maybe you have company equipment, where is that going to be stored and dealt with? So talking to your vendors can also be a valuable place for ideas and other resources.
Absolutely, because it can critically affect your plan. Like, for example, a perfect example that had come to mind, and we were just actually having this conversation a moment ago, but let's say your VoIP system, your Spectrum system is in the office. Well, if any part of your plan is hinged off of dialing, calling people via their extensions, or having your vendors or your customers able to contact you, well, if your office is out of power and there's a critical piece of your phone infrastructure that's in the office, and if that's offline, then your phone system's offline, well, then suddenly your disaster plan has to adjust, has to be able to shift to that. And that might not be something you realize until you talk to your VoIP vendor.
Yep.
They might be like, oh yeah, well, if that blue box is offline, well, your phones won't work. Oh, okay, that's critical to know. So
yeah, and we actually have a couple customers on our VoIP platform that have prepared hurricane out-of-office messages, so they can simply put that message on, and it notifies their customers. It's a cloud-based system. They get the call. Customers can hear a message that they're closed for a hurricane, and at least they're setting that expectation to their customers.
Absolutely, good point.
Well, I guess kind of moving towards wrapping this up, I want to talk about some of the resources people can use to really do their planning.
So many resources.
Well, we have a couple favorites though.
We do have a couple favorites, and first and foremost is NOAA.gov. That is hands down. They have all of the resources. They have the preparedness guide. They also have the spaghetti models, past and future, and they do regular updates if there is an event, if there is a notification. That is something I always want to recommend to all of our clients and beyond, that NOAA does their official announcement at 8 a.m., 12 p.m., and 3 p.m., I believe. 8 a.m., 12 p.m., and 3 p.m., that's when they do their official updates to their models. And so we actually will, especially if if we're within that 48-hour cone, we'll be basing our recommendations off of those. And so that is something very much to keep a close eye on as an event may occur. What's another one?
Well, my favorite is FloridaDisaster.org. FloridaDisaster.org is put together by state of Florida, and it's great for your business plan as well as your personal plan, and I encourage you to do both. It has a friendly walkthrough experience where you'll be prompted with questions, and when you're done, it'll produce a document for you that you can share with your coworkers or your family, and especially for the family side, it'll help you think about things like pets or medication or elderly family members. And it's really good about just giving you those thought-provoking questions to say, if this situation occurs, what am I going to do? So FloridaDisaster.org is definitely great. And I don't know if you've done it. It does not take long. And in fact, you don't even have to answer all the questions. If you don't know, you can kind of move through the question and get your PDF, and then maybe you come back and you talk to your coworkers or you talk to your family about those questions you couldn't answer on your own. But now you've got this kind of starting point. And it just took you minutes to do. So I think it's a great resource.
And I think, I don't know if it's still on there, but it's one of my favorite thought provokers from that website from a few years back, was always just, if your house or your business was to be flooded by just a few inches of water, what would be impacted? Because it actually, it led me down this whole thought process of desktops or any electrical equipment that's just sitting on the floor. All you need to do to help prevent against that one major factor is just, set the desktop on the desk, or pull up the equipment or something on the desk. And that's just, that's a huge, it's not something you think about. You're just like, oh, okay, well, I might not have access or something, or if there's water, it's all gone, but it may just be a little bit.
Yeah, no, and again, we've seen that. Clients went and bought large quantities of trash bags, right, and covered monitors and things like that in case windows blew in and water was getting in and protect equipment. So things you need to, things you'll think about after you do those kind of questionnaires. So, okay, good. Any other web resources there, or?
There's our website.
Oh yeah.
It's our own website, which we have put together some incredible resources. So that would be infotech.us/hurricane-season, and that has a number of our resources, as well as I think this video.
Yes, for sure, and we're going to be sharing this with all of our customers. This is a part of our quarterly planning with customers. This is our big topic coming up in July.
Yep.
So we want to make sure all of our customers are thinking about their disaster plan and at least, again, starting these conversations initially internally and then evolving them from there.
So yeah, be prepared.
Exactly.
July meetings.
All right, well, I guess before we wrap up, so you're still sticking with Gaston as your favorite name of the year?
I am. You know, I would do a little song and dance, but I can't right now.
Okay, so we'll have to make sure everybody stays tuned because we'll have to do something special if Gaston makes it up there to
We might have
major
to.
hurricane status.
Yes. All right, that sounds like a plan.
Be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. As always, post any questions below and we will be happy to answer them. And you can learn more about us at infotech.us. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Steve Williams.
I'm Justin. Bye.
Bye.